And joining us live in studio, Botsang Moiloa, political analyst. Zamo Madlala is with the Black Empowerment Foundation as spokesperson for the National Working Committee. Professor Barry Hanyani is a political analyst, and Veli Mbele is a writer and secretary of the Black Power Fund. Good evening, gentlemen, and thanks so much for joining us. I mean, some have been asking the question about the relevance of having the SACP in the tripartite alliance and whether there should be an exit strategy. Is that the time now, Professor Hanyani?
Good evening, Cindy. Good evening to your viewers. Look, I think there's two parts to your question. One, the historical significance of the relationship that has been there before the demise of apartheid. And surely, not only was it symbolic, but went a long way to ensure that the democratic project is indeed realized. Secondly, is this marriage about marriage of convenience? Is it going to die soon? I don't think so. It will take a lot of deep thinking within the SACP leadership to think twice. Should they go on their own? And if so, what does this mean for them to become a fully fledged political party come 2019? I think it's too soon. But in politics, a day is almost a year. Anything is indeed possible.
Yeah, but can we take the nefarious activity, as our sources have shared, that there is a deliberate attempt from some anti-Zuma ANC leaders, together with the SACP, to discuss the removal, or rather the exit of the SACP from the alliance? Is this something that we should take seriously, or do you think, as the Prof says, by virtue of their survival, they can't afford to?
Well, thanks, Cindy, and good evening to your viewers. First, it's not a unique situation or an unusual situation, because I want to make the example of, even before we speak about South Africa, of the various African countries that have attained independence, and they find themselves in this kind of challenges, because this is not a unique thing. But the other thing, you must understand that the challenges that ruling parties face, particularly in the African continent, have a lot to do with some of the vested interests that continue to play themselves out. And so a lot of what you see in the ruling parties, our own country included, has very little to do with, in my view, organic internal struggles, but it all has to do with the struggle to dislodge this part of the continent from foreign influence, you know, as it were, because as things stand, we have not dislodged ourselves fully from that. So if you want to just look at the internal ructions in the ruling party as normal organizational ructions, and you don't bring in that historical context that speaks to post-colonial independence struggles, we may not understand what is actually happening.
Yeah. So you're saying that the regime change narrative is essentially what is at play, depending on whose vested interest is being preserved or protected, and it's bigger than just the politics, if I'm understanding you.
No, absolutely. And look at it this way. You must understand how 1994 happened, because 1994 happened, yes, but 1994 did not necessarily dislodge white power, particularly in our country, you know, because we reached a settlement, remember. And a settlement does not necessarily imply the full defeat of the original colonizers, because that has not happened. And so there's a sense in which colonizers find a way of replicating themselves and or finding new forms of existence through indigenous forces, you know. And it's a phenomenon that is not unique to South Africa. So all I'm saying is that to reduce what we are seeing now to only internal party ructions may not make us understand why South Africa is important in the broader scheme of global imperialist conquest.
Yeah, but is it a healthy relationship to still have, if you're saying that some leaders have got, or they're conflicted, they're not necessarily interested in the unity or the survival of the ANC in this case, that going forward they need to review what it is that still keeps them together, if it's not the ideologies?
Tell me to come in there, Cindy. Good evening to you and your viewers and fellow panelists. You know, I like the way Veli is putting it down to say, let us broaden this whole thing. Internal squabbles within the ruling party and its alliances, the tripartite, wouldn't be a challenge. The regime changes when they happen, and The paper that was presented by Minister Mahlobo actually explains it very well. If you have finished fighting the colonialists and the imperialists of this world, what they do is they seek agents within ruling parties, within political organization formations in the country, and they use those people within inside. I don't think the ANC is incapable of resolving its internal problems that are now said to be leading the SACP to want to divorce itself from the ANC. I also don't think the SACP at this stage will even take chances of going all by themselves. But that's why these secret meetings, that's why these talks and invitations to what I regard as the disgruntled people from the ANC. You know, some are disgruntled, some are bitter, some are angry, some are dissatisfied with the current leadership. But then the principal question becomes, why would you attack your own family, your own home, when there's a problem? Even if it's the head of the family who has a problem, you don't go outside and lobby other kids of the family who are disgruntled to can come and remove the head. You think the organization first, and I don't think that's the case at the moment. They will have to go with SAFTU. They will have to go with the 101 veterans. They will have to go, trying to lobby other parties or other forces that broke away from the ANC. But again, I'm seeing a political party coming, if they will go independent, out of anger, out of, it's not wisdom, it's not about policy, it's bringing everybody else who is angry with the current leadership under one roof in order to can say, this is not serving the purpose anymore. But when you look at it as well, most of the people who are in the forefront of this anger within the ruling party is the people who have been in the forefront. SACP, Anti-Zuma himself, Jeremy Cronin himself, they've been in the forefront of the ANC all along. And now at this stage, because they are dissatisfied with a so-called certain function of the current leader, then they don't see the ANC as a relevant organization. It's them that we should be questioning where their loyalty and what did they do for all these years.
I mean, have they even betrayed their mandate towards the working class? And the doublespeak that we hear around whether white monopoly capital exists or it doesn't exist, and the public criticism and maligning of the president at any given opportunity, and the Gupta Association. Is all of this just creating more cracks or rather divisions and possibly leading to the downfall of either the SACP or the ANC?
Well, our position as a BEF is quite simply that all of these episodes are, quite frankly, a distraction from what we should really be looking at. The issue of monopoly capital can be traced back to the SACP itself. And given that they are meeting this very week, I'd like to read from them, from The Road to South African Freedom, one of the sentences there. Effective economic domination in South Africa is thus exercised by an alliance of logical white monopoly interests in mining, industry, and agriculture, together with foreign imperialists and representatives of state monopoly capitalism. The communists said this in 1962. So the whole Bao Pottinger nonsense, let's put it aside. Let's go back to what we should actually be looking at. The SACP is really trying to strengthen its voice towards the elective conference in December. Hence, today it came out with the decision probably to say they will only next year decide whether they go it alone, because it's towards their nominated decision of who they would like to see as a candidate to lead the ANC going forward. Hence the suspension of the decision. So that is just normal political rumblings. And we shouldn't allow those to actually distract us from the actual main focus. If anybody says, does white monopoly capital exist? I say 1910, the Union of South Africa is formed. 1912, the ANC comes into formation. 1948, apartheid comes into formation. Then we know what happens then on. Then in 2017, I'll give you a current example. We have Stephen Kosef, a CEO of a leading bank. In the same week where we find out that CEOs are earning 69,000 Rand a day. Please note, that's the lower side of what he earns. Actually reported he earns 84 million Rand a year, which takes him down to about 7 million Rand a month. He stands up at a conference of the ANC and says that it was crazy for the mining minister to ask for 30% for the majority population in this country. Those are the things that should be raising our eye.
But exactly, but the obsession, of course, with the politics is inevitable because there is an elective conference within the SACP and in December for the ANC. But if the leaders themselves are so fixated with what Zama is calling essential sideshows, where does that take us for the transformation imperative? Professor Hanya.
Look, I think, and I fully agree with your comments made, it's quite sad at a time when serious issues should have been discussed, not only this week, but in the ANC conference itself. What do we do with the unemployment rate that we sit at? And a whole range of issues that deals with transformation, empowerment. I've always engaged on the debate that says, can we please sit down and define what is this thing called socio-radical economic transformation? What is the content? Who drives it? Who are the beneficiaries? Yes, criticism may come to say, but you're talking operational issues. But these are the real issues that must carry policy forward. Instead of dealing with issues as to who should succeed, who should not succeed, which faction should enjoy
but
better
I would disagree
exposure
that
and so
we've discussed enough about land restitution and issues around inequality and how to bring back the land. So I think you need to come in here that, do we still need to have another referendum? Do we need to have another consultative process to deal with injustices of the past?
It's not referendum. You must come up with content. You must come up with a roadmap that clearly says we move from here given the kind of problems that we experience. Who drives it? Who are the beneficiaries? Define what radical is. And make
So
it clear
control,
to
management,
everyone.
ownership, equity, all of that doesn't cut it. We need to expound more on it. Okay, what's up?
I hear what Prof is saying. That's much more technical. Who should be driving radical economic transformation in the country? It's purposefully the government, because the people are not on an equal footing. And I've always said it cannot be anybody else, but it has to be government taking a lead in this instance. The ANC over there, so the government over there, they've produced good policies that were never implemented. They've produced documents that whenever they didn't have the guts or the bravery to can implement this. The willing buyer, willing seller policy of government, it did not work. They should have actually even stopped that process within the first 10 years when they realized that it's not delivering what needs to be delivered. But we should not shy, Prof, that when we speak of radical, I always say we actually simply should be meaning the status quo cannot remain. We cannot do things the way we've been doing things all along. You know, radical in this instance is that you find unequitable distribution of the land and ownership of the land in the country. Government has to come in systems. First of all, we have to arrive at a point whereby we are saying, are we doing that? And then we can start saying, yes, we are doing it, but let's put systems into place. The how. It is very important to know the how.
I just want to go back to the relationship between the ANC and SACP, as our sources have told us, secret meetings, discussing an exit strategy, etc. The relevance of the SACP and what policy or reform they have brought up. If a Minister of Higher Education, Blades Nzimande himself, couldn't even handle the fees must fall issue as the General Secretary of the SACP, what is their relevance? And can they go it alone without the ANC in future? Fairly.
I just want to deal with two issues quickly and then come to your question. You see, the issues of distribution, equity, for me, are false narratives. In any situation where you need to give people real independence, you must first address the most fundamental question, ownership. So we are talking distribution, equity, and also, but the actual question is ownership, because once you confront the question of ownership of the land / other forms of natural resources, honestly, the other issues which my colleague says the professor is dealing with technically become givens, you know. So we are afraid to have a honest discussion first about the actual thing, ownership. Because what you then have, because most of the narratives and discussions are false, every year you have people who are in a power to implement policy complaining like everybody else that the majority of the wealth continues to be in the hand of the... It's a tired narrative, you know, because we tend to focus on the false discourse, which is distribution. So you can't distribute what you don't own. That's the point of the matter. We need, if we say we are indigenous and this country belongs to us, it must be reflected in the first thing, which is ownership. That's one. Two, back to your question. The question of whether the South African Communist Party remains relevant and whether they would be able to execute a political program on their own, you know. You can't answer it in a definite and say in future they will do well or not. But what you can say, which is back to what the Prof has said, for any political party or movement to be relevant and to be of value, especially to the dispossessed, it will depend on what the fundamental of their political program is. And my argument is the South African Communist Party, any other organization, if any of their political programs, whether to stay or to break away, is not based, amongst others, in fundamentally dealing with the question of who should own the wealth on this country. Any other organization that does not deal that with me is going to be useless, because the fundamental problem in our country is that we are a dispossessed, invaded, castrated, and dominated people, particularly because we don't own anything. That's why you find us complaining when we are supposed to be in charge, because we don't own anything.
Yeah, but the squabbles maybe are the gatekeepers are the ones that are benefiting, that have, especially with the historical BBBE acts, etc., that they essentially just wanting to preserve their own comfort, if you will.
Well, I suppose one of the things that's been pretty much agreed is that there is no particular policy position that the SACP has come up with that would promote why they would want to break away. It is more around the chosen leadership, which in reality one would have to say that it wouldn't be grounds enough for them to break away, and hence, if you look at it realistically, to put an election machinery in 1 year, if you're leaving the decision to next year, it's not really realistically going to happen. I think it's more to just strengthen their position.
Yeah, so it's survival really, and retaining their positions, or hopefully being elected.
That's why earlier on I said the ANC Congress in December is going to influence their decision, who will come into power in the ANC Congress in December. And secondly, the alliance partners that they are trying to rally around them is going to determine if those alliance partners are coming in, is going to say, and they won't go out as the Communist Party. The information that we received, I don't know who's NN7 sources, my sources have told me that they are reviving the patriotic, the United Front or a patriotic alliance kind of a thing. The United Front has been on the pipeline and on the talks in this country since February, and it looks like the SACP have taken the first baiting to say, we will run with this, but you guys, I mean, Safe SA is part of this whole meeting that happened on Tuesday. They've brought in NUMSA, they are talking to Vavi on the other hand, and we all know that also most of the union leaders, like the current Deputy President, Mr. Ramaphosa, started his career at the NUM. We also know that most of the Secretary Generals of the African National Congress, historically, they either came from the Labour Federation or from the South African Communist Party. So these are people who are very influential. But like I said the other day, Cindy, in politics, this democratic process of electioneering and so forth, it's numbers that work, it's numbers that count. If the SACP and their grouping are not going to convince the people on the ground that we are bringing a totally different ball game. And Velia said it correctly. The only ball game that we are left with as a country is land ownership in this country. That, or people are not going to go and follow in another new political party.
All right, Botang, we're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thanks indeed. Botang Mwela, political analyst. Professor Barry Hanyane is a political analyst with the University of the Northwest. Zamo Madlala, Black Empowerment Foundation National spokesperson, and we have Veli Mbele, a writer, secretary of the Black Power Fund. And you at home, thanks for staying with us. We're back after this.